grew up in Philly,
Okay.
and I grew up in a real kind of neighborhood that I don't find maybe in New York, but not really out west more, where it's like generations like came over from wherever and stayed
Yes.
there.
Right.
And like for, many, I think I was like the first one that moved really, far away, other than like across the bridge to New Jersey or whatever, like 20 minutes away. I could walk to both all four grandparents, two great grand sets of great grandparents, great aunt, their brothers and sisters, so great aunts. So
Yep.
I had all of that influence. In fact, and this is kind of a lead in that I didn't expect, but that's really where my real spirituality came from, is those older like grandparents and great aunts and uncles. Yeah, more than my parents.
Wow. Very similar. Like I think that New Orleans, maybe these older cities, but
Yes.
yeah, I was at 6 years old, literally walking from my aunt's to my mama's house. And
Mm-hmm.
and we were the first family that actually moved out of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, same. And I laugh because I was not supposed to be walking around the streets that young, going across like big streets.
I
Oh my
know. I know when I
God.
think about it, I was like, I had just freedom.
True.
And I would walk in Philly. I don't know if it's the same in New Orleans, but they have like alleyways between the houses because there's all these roads.
Yes.
And I would walk in the alleyways and like nothing, like it
Oh
was
my
just
gosh. Yes. In
my,
fact, I talk about that alley all the time because there was a Doberman pincher
oh,
that would, bark at you and jump really high. And there was all this fear. So we would run as fast as we could. But that was like an obstacle and a challenge that we had to go through daily.
totally. And or and some alleys were worse than others, and you did want to run through. And I can remember my mother leaving my younger, because I'm the oldest of four. I can remember leaving the infants outside
Yeah.
in their like the pram, like parked outside for hours because they wanted them to sleep in fresh air, and like that was okay. The worst thing,
Yeah.
sometimes they would put net over it because they were worried about flies, but that
Yes. Oh
that
my goodness.
was
Well, and Diana, you know what else? I could hear from my mama's house. I remember, the steamboats. You could hear them right there because we were real close to the levee, to the Mississippi. And then you could hear the church bells like on the
Mhm,
hour from
mhm,
the
right,
Catholic church
right.
that I'd walk to.
Yes, I think New Orleans has parishes too.
Yeah.
Like in Philly, like you would identify yourself, your neighborhood by your parish.
Oh, wow. They have parishes too?
Yeah.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I grew up in Our Lady of Mount Carmel,
I've heard you say this.
generations that had gotten married there. And so I went to 12 years of Catholic school. Last four were in all girls Catholic school. It was probably between 2,000 and 2,500 girls in the school. And it sounds like maybe a horror, for most. I loved it. It was
Yeah.
like, I just I really thrived
Your
in
sisterhood.
yeah. So, a very like, I guess somewhat unusual.
Not in my, I'm the first person to go to a public school on both sides of my family
Oh,
ever.
oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So
Hmm.
yeah. So in Philly, honestly, it wasn't an option because the public schools were so challenging that you like
Yeah, same in
kind of had to go
Louisiana.
to.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, at least my parents felt that you did.
Yeah.
But of course, tuition at the time was like, I think for high school, $500 a year.
Oh,
And if
wow.
you had more than one child, it was all covered. So five
Exactly.
everybody. So it
Well,
was,
I'm curious to know, like, I know in Louisiana, and I've talked to other people who have validated this, but, if you had a big family, which they did,
mhm,
usually,
mhm,
it was a very big
mhm.
family, it would be that maybe one or two would become a nun or a priest.
Interesting. My senior year nun, who taught creative writing, actually called my mother at one point and was trying to persuade my mother
You're getting recruited.
I was being recruited. And I was kind of a little insulted because I was like, why am I not, cool enough? Like, what is it about me? But I think
Mm,
that they saw something that they didn't know how to categorize it. Nuns picked up on it right away. Like I would be asked at first grade, to lead, 200 second graders in the communion around the church, because they knew I wouldn't be all over the place and they could count on me. I would have to wear, the little white communion dress, but a year ahead of time, and lead the second graders, and then also do the May procession. And we would circumambulate the church. And I was, part of the crowning of the Blessed Mother for, the May processions and things. So, fortunately, actually, I had at least Mother Mary as a figure holding the divine feminine.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
So,
My mama, she taught me how to do the rosary, and I have very early memories of that. And I mean, boy, we would pray, and ask for forgiveness and ask for protection and ask for this and ask for
yes.
that
Yes.
my whole life. And I really, really looked up to my mama. She was so selfless.
Yes.
I mean, so selfless. It is okay to love yourself. It doesn't mean that you are selfish.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. True. And that's a hard one, that we're setting boundaries and thinking that that's not loving or not compassionate or empathetic. There's all that, and that this is just generational.
It is. And what about in your family? I don't know, but in mine, the men were like messiahs.
Yes.
All the boys in the family. And it was almost like, even if you had, with like your brother, take care of your brother, right? And even when I had my first son, it was like that.
Wow.
For a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think there definitely were tones of that more in my grandparents than I think my mother was trying to. So she had 3 girls and 1 boy, and he definitely was treated differently, but not so extreme, And I probably, my daughter lets me know that I continued that a bit.
I do.
But I think it takes time sometimes for things to work out. I always wonder sometimes when we look back, or people, let's say 100 years from now, look back, and my generation I'll speak of. So I was born in the early 60s. So I'm 60. We got a little bit lost in between, like the old world and the new world. It's kind of like negotiating that. And I've done a lot of work and a lot better job as I've gotten older on that. And certainly living out in California has definitely, I don't even know if it would have been possible, not 30 years ago. I think it required me to move and be in a whole different environment and thinking and stuff like that. Yeah.
And there's this holding on to the roots and the traditions, I think, in the older world. Yeah.
And I totally value that. I value now in a whole new way saying the rosary, for example, and I don't look at it as this chore, and I look at it as this amazing mantra, and almost like the Hail Mary is kind of like a spell that we would say. And I really do get, that I certainly, and I'm sure you and many other women these days would have been considered witches back in the day.
Know.
Right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. That's why one of the books I love from years ago is The Red Tent, but also there are others, because it was like told from a woman's perspective. I think history told from a woman's perspective, which we don't really almost never hear, right? Because we're not the prominent voice, is really a whole other thing. A whole other take.
Yeah. I think about that with the Bible. I'm like, it was not written for women. It was written by men for men.
Right. It's kind of interesting. One of my real big openings that happened at my Saturn return, I was living in Brooklyn and had started having a lot of spiritual experiences. That's really when I began my relationship with Mother Mary, but it was born out of not being able to feel like I could go to God for anything. It was too intimidating for me. So I figured, she was like an intermediary, which is really how she was portrayed in the Catholic Church, right? As the intermediary. But she was accessible. She was a mother. She was accessible. She was compassionate. And she was my entry. She was my entry into the whole world of the divine feminine. But, I started my automatic writing back then in the early 90s, getting messages from her. My path has taken many turns since then, but that was my my initial.
That's
And
so interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about that until right now when you're saying that, like, where was my entry? But, I think mine was with Mother Cabrini.
mm,
I have a very, very strong connection to Mother Cabrini because of New Orleans, but also because of here in Colorado, we have a huge statue of her in the
yes,
mountains. It's beautiful, but I felt like she was like the little woman that could, kind of like the
right,
little engine that could. But,
right,
and
yeah,
I just thought that, oh my God, like this woman back then who wasn't even in the best health got from one side of the country to the other and back and helped so many children.
I went to that statue there
You
in
have, it's
Colorado.
powerful.
Yes,
It's
yes,
got
yes.
such a powerful spiritual presence. Like, even if you're not spiritual and you go there, it's so powerful. So I think that that's actually my entry. Thank you for helping me connect with
Yeah.
that, because no one ever told me that there was any kind of divinity in being a woman. I mean,
Mm,
other than having a child and being a wife and serving.
yes.
Right. And I have such a different perspective now.
Great.
Uh,
Amazing. And I work in a recovery center offering Reiki and, I kind of put Reiki as the overall umbrella, but it's spiritual mentoring and cumulative of all the things that I've done for 30
mhm.
years. But women will say to me, I cannot connect with my higher power. Like AA really strongly, obviously,
Mm,
an emphasis on that. And I've been asking for 20 years, I can't do it. These are people that are like sitting very resistant, not necessarily spiritual, her arms crossed, like,
yeah.
what is this, And I start talking about the divine feminine, or the idea that there's a feminine aspect to the divine
Mhm.
and to God. And literally, like, I've had people start crying and saying,
Yeah.
this is what I've been looking for
I
like
feel
20.
like that happened to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. And I've had other, people that have had that happen. They're like, I never thought of it. Like, it just never entered my mind.
Never, never, ever entered my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
It's,
a
it's
really
wild,
shock.
I think that we like, there's so many things like that, like in life that, and I know that there's another woman I'm taking this line from, but these are the waters that we swim in because we're so used to that's just being what is, that we don't take time to look at, well, what about this? Like, I was a trained massage therapist. Like, the first time I saw, like maybe 10 years later, a picture of the female body muscle structure, I was like, oh my God. Like, I never, you only see a male
Right.
body, and you
Well,
never see.
I'm a massage therapist too. I'm finding this to be disturbing right now.
Even like the breast tissue and all these like muscles and things that almost looks
Yeah.
like flowers. And it was disturbing to me that I had never seen a picture of the female
Right.
muscular structure, the anatomy, and bringing back that, like, in so many levels. So for me, it's like the rise of the divine feminine is all of it. It's like bringing the attention totally, like, it's this area that we haven't seen, in this area and this area and this area, even let's say ultrasounds were only became a thing because it was developed for the astronauts. Originally, NASA developed for the astronauts, and that's the only
Wow.
reason why we really had ultrasounds. So there's just so many things. So I'm also a doula, so
Shocking. Okay. Wow.
yeah. So
You've been led to so many beautiful
I
journeys, that
really,
sounds
I
like.
have. I mean, you certainly can see the hand of the divine, and
Right.
think of myself as pretty much come full circle from my own birth, because so my mother lost a baby before me. She went
Mm.
into labor at 7 months and lost the baby. So her and my both grandmothers and their sisters all started praying the rosary and a novena to Anna, or Saint Anne, right, for my conception. And then my mother made a prayer of saying, she felt like she was having a girl, the first baby was a boy, that if I was okay, that she would put the name Anne or Anna in my name. And while she was laboring with me in a Catholic hospital, and the nuns were rubbing relics of Anna on my mother's stomach. So, then I'm
Oh my God.
bringing this, the Holy Womb Chakra teachings and the doula work and everything and that consciousness back, it's like
Full circle.
full circle.
Not many people ever talk about, Grandma Anna.
Yeah. So the Catholics, at least in Philadelphia, and I think other places, call her Anne, Saint Anne.
And Saint Anne.
I kind of think of it's Anne is more like the French, and Anna would be more like the Italian version, type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think we get different things from different people, refer to her differently. But I have always had a strong resonance with her. I can't really explain except to say that I think it was there. I feel that she oversaw my incarnation.
Yeah.
So now people might interpret that different ways. You were part of her soul group or whatever. I don't know, but I know that somehow she has overseen my incarnation. I mean, literally, like my female relatives praying novenas to her,
Mm-hmm.
and the nuns doing the relics, rubbing the relics.
Yeah.
And just, and I really had a dedication to Mary since I was that I can remember from about 3 years old. So when I talk about my entry into this, it's kind of like maybe that was my second entry. So I was kind of born into it, right? And then I shut down consciously when I was about 9 or 10. I started having experiences of leaving my body and helping like the older relatives pass over. I had nobody to really go to kind of explain what was happening. And it started to kind of scare me because I would know, like, if somebody was going to die in their sleep, I would see myself leave my room and go to their house and be at the foot of their bed and helping them pass over. And then didn't know the next morning, I would find out that, like, oh, Uncle George died, but I already knew and I was happy for him, right? In that way. And I couldn't reconcile how sad everybody else was with that. And it was creating, so I can remember sitting up in my bed and saying, I just want to be normal, whatever normal is. But when I did that, I feel like you know how that is, you can't cut off part of yourself. Mm-hmm. So when I did that, I was cutting part of myself off. And then I kind of lost my bearings in the world a little bit. Like I didn't know what I really liked anymore. When I look back on it now, I'm like, wow, like that was a big choice. And then I opened up again. Like that was when I'm on my conscious getting on a path. I was about 28. Interestingly enough, I started to really question, the whole existence of God at that time. And I had some experiences that were disturbing around that and scary, actually. So I started calling on Mother Mary. And I actually felt some beings, like I felt her presence in my apartment with like 3 other beings that felt male to me. And they were like monitoring me. I felt like they were monitoring my process. I almost felt like a little child. You see little kids on preschool holding onto a rope and, they're being pulled along to wherever. That's what it felt like to me. Like I was being like pulled along, like they were like making sure that I was somehow still on my path, even though I was doing my own thing.
I know what you're talking about. I have felt that.
Yes. Yeah. So this is pre, being able to order anything off of Amazon, but I would order books from the Edgar Cayce Foundation down in Virginia Beach and like have them delivered and like read them and get all interested. That was all in New York. And then I was guided to move to California from New York. That was definitely like, I'm going to say a huge initiation because it required an enormous amount of faith to make that move. And it was a big move. And I did it with 3 kids and 2 stepchildren in tow, ages 1.5 to 16. And it was intense.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. But I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember there were times in my life that I definitely was doing some stuff I wasn't supposed to be doing. And I was, but yet I knew that I had such a strong protection, like spiritually.
Yes.
And when I look back, I've always referenced that I had powerful prayers for me from my aunts and from my mom and my momo, who almost I felt held that space for me.
Yes.
And still loved me through it. And I totally got through it. Well, one, because I became a young mother in my 20s. So, but It was around 30 as well. I think that is so divine. I mean, call it whatever you want. There is that,
Yeah,
connection to, the Saturn return that, I mean, all of a sudden I just was like, who am I? What am I doing? And I started questioning everything.
right, right.
Yeah. Mm.
And I do think that, like, at the time, I can remember sitting with my father's mother a lot, and she would be praying the rosary, and I would be just, kind of like, oh, this is just her praying for, and she would say, I pray for you. And I was like, oh, that's nice. But it wasn't, I think now I'm like, wow, like my path has been challenging. And what would it have been if I didn't have all that grace and those prayers and things like that I really value so much now? Like,
Me
wow,
too.
like that was really big. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt like my mama had like a direct line straight to whoever was that, all powerful. That was
Yeah.
that she would send her prayers to. But
Yeah.
you also create such a beautiful space. I've been involved in your circles with Dan Morse, who I've
Yes.
had on before, and very rarely have I found myself so relaxed in a space. Your voice, too, would absolutely captivate my soul, not my mind. My mind would completely shut off, but I felt very, all I can describe is like captivated. And both times that I've been in that space with you, I have felt so much of the divine feminine come forth and have not chose to put out thoughts to her or prayers and have only been opened almost like a flower opening
Mm.
just to truly receive. And I have, and it's been always very divine.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's nice to get validation and perspective on how people are experiencing that energy. And I know that I have levels, like when I'm doing an invocation or calling in a space, it's like one thing. And but also, and then when I'm at work and I'm bringing that through, it's another level, and different
Yeah.
languaging, speaking to different people. But I think in general, there's an energetic, as we all know, on the spiritual path right now, especially, there's a lot of talk about ascension, but I think we're also each having the experience of the descension, right? The descension and
Hmm.
becoming embodiments ourselves of the divine feminine or Sophia energy. And I do look at Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and Kuan Yin as high expressions of that embodiment.
Yes. Yeah.
And but I do think that it's available to us now.
Hmm.
It's time to bring that in. And I have had, many experiences. Some of my most recent powerful experience was in France. Dan and I, we did a trip. We went around to all the cathedrals, or not all
Your
of
Sophia
them. Yes,
pilgrimage.
a
Yes.
history tour.
I
So
love it.
history tour. Yeah, and sitting in Rheims Cathedral, which is the cathedral where almost all the kings of France were coronated and some of the queens.
Oh,
And I was sitting in a pew. I have this certain pew at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Sophia had asked me to go there back in 2014, at least once or twice a week, and walk the labyrinth. And then I developed this kind of relationship with a pew placement in the church, in the cathedral, that really was like a portal for me. So at Dan's suggestion in Rhymes, he said, "Why don't you go sit in the same pew, count back your pews, and find your spot?" And so I did, and sure enough, there was a huge portal, and I almost felt like Seraph was coming in, like being come down my through my crown and down my body to really and it came to about like maybe my heart chakra. And then the next day it went down further. And then finally at Avebury, which is the kind of the sister of Stonehenge in England, because we wound up going to England too.
oh,
And
wow.
I felt like it really grounded into the ground there. But it was a real physical sensation. And again at Rhymes, so I'm sitting there, right, and my head starts, like, the around the top of my head where you imagine a crown would be, starts getting tight, like as if I have a wreath on. And then the inside here was started burning, like I was getting a sunburn. And it went on, like, it wasn't like painful, but it was like, oh, my head's like hot. Like I would normally do something about this. And so I felt like it was kind of like an etheric level of a coronation. And I had been given a coronation ritual. I was asked to do a bridal chamber event here in San Francisco Bay Area, Marin County, years back. I think it was 2016, 17. And for the bridal chamber ritual, I wound up receiving this coronation ritual from Sophia, where I felt like a dove put a substance in my left hand. And then I was given these certain positions. So I did the ritual, and I think I must have worked on at least 100, maybe 100, and somewhere between 100 and 100 and maybe 20 people that day, doing this, what I call the Holy Ampulla of Sophia. So I didn't even know what an ampulla was, apparently. So at Rhymes, they do have the oil that they used for all these coronations from like 300 AD all the way up until the end of the French monarchy. And all the kings and everything, then they use this oil, and they call it ampoule. I guess it's a French word. So they spell it differently than we do, but it translated to ampulla in English. And so that's the ritual I do for helping us to put our crowns back on that we were always meant to have. Thing that I feel like I was given it a little bit maybe before its time. I mean, I worked on, but now it's kind of, yeah. So it's kind of like really one of those shockingly believing, when the veils open and you have full on experiences, of another, I am forever grateful that I feel like, in that sense, like you were saying about your grandmother, that like the foundation was laid, like the foundation was there.
You are making my heart just less angry. I don't know if Dan shared with you, because for sure when I had him on, I was still going through, I almost felt like I had religious trauma syndrome. Like, was so angry that the divine feminine had been kept in the dark for generations. And the more I read the Gnostic Gospels, the more I got angry in some way that it was kept from us, and that I just wanted everyone to know.
Like that's a healthy anger,
It is a healthy anger.
I had a similar experience. I went to the Holy Womb Chakra training, which is so the Holy Womb teachings were kept on palm leaves, and only kind of shared with the saints and sages of India for like literally at least 7,000 years, somewhere between 7 and 10,000 years. So the teachings were originally given to the Saptarishis, which are 7 great sages of India, and then only passed down to either saints or sages in India until about, I'm going to say 20, maybe 10, something like that. And they were a young male Indian guru Sri Kaleshwar, came to California and opened an ashram originally down in Santa Cruz, and then kind of set up different ones. And I went to these teachings. He taught the teachings to his close followers, but this was the first time they're going to offer a class and then have us have the ability to be teachers of it. So I went to that training in Mendocino and out here. But the same reaction was kind of like, these were kept from us for, like, whoever even heard of a womb chakra? Like, what is that even? It is a different chakra, but you don't hear about it in the 7 main chakras, I believe because of its power. So what struck me, why I was even open to this teaching and going there for this training, was because I'm like, so if this young male Indian guru is coming here and saying that, he said Mother Mary was the most powerful master that ever lived. And I was like, what?
Yeah, what?
What? And what the reason he said is because she knew these teachings, she had access to them. And that's how she was able to bring in an avatar like Jesus. There's practices, there's mantras, and not just her, like I'm sure Anna knew it, that
Right.
the women in that orbit, knew these
Well,
things.
I think I had on John Van Auken of the Edgar Casey Foundation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And he even knew Edgar Casey's secretary who did all the writing.
Oh, well.
And he has wrote many books, but one of them he wrote about a scene, and I believe, really believed that Mary, her mother, and all of them were part of the Essene.
Yeah. Yeah. And they definitely had higher teachings.
But that's it. There's all these secret societies that knew this
Yes.
information, and
Yes.
because they
Yes.
had to keep, and so that's kind of what I had to go through it. I had to grow through it, just like I did with my ancestry, is like, because it's nothing that I've ever heard. It's nothing I could actually understand. So foreign to me, all of that. And what I find is so remarkable is that, and I know it's happened to more than you and I, is that we're receiving these things in different ways. However, we are receiving very similar things.
Yes.
And they're not from books. They're not from, a lot of it is experience, or that we are divinely led, like you were, to find this womb healing, like it was there,
Right.
for you,
Right.
to make that move on to the next stage that you were ready for.
For years, I had been part of other Indian guru groups, and which were wonderful, and they definitely helped me on my path. And all due respect, I was kind of ready to move on from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit concerned when I was there that am I kind of getting caught in this?
Yeah.
This is not my thing right now. And Sophia came in and she said, "These are my teachings." And then I could relax and I could really okay, and I can get with that program. I'm good. I don't have to worry that I'm going into what I kind of look as an old paradigm, right? Where the male guru type of thing.
Exactly.
Just relax and say, oh, yeah, right.
Out of here when's the first time that you even heard of the name Sophia, because there are Saint Sophias,
Yes.
I've done research on that. None that any Catholic I know have ever been able to explain to me who she is.
No, I never, as growing up, heard other people that were raised Catholic that say that they had some exposure. I didn't.
No.
So my first experience was I was living in Mount Shasta in 2007. She came in and she had a green dress on and she had a mala like this, which is a really long lotus seed mala, right? These are lotus seeds, and they're long beads, so it makes the mala really long. And she had it at her, like hanging, like the nuns used to. They used to like hang rosaries or something. So she had it kind of hanging that way. And she was just flicking it. And she said, "I am going to bring you to all of my highest teachings, and I will give you my keys." And then that was it. And then I didn't really have any real experience. I thought about the experience from time to time, but I didn't really feel like I was receiving any keys. Years passed. And fast forward to I'm living in San Francisco and she comes in again. And I'm thinking, like, who is this? Is this the Black Madonna? Like, what is this energy? And then she was more specific and she said, "I'm going to bring you to my highest teachings and I'm going to ask that you resist none. And I am preparing you to be a voice for Sophia in the world, voice for me, basically, voice for me in the world, Sophia." And people are going to need the mother in ways that you cannot understand now. So this, look where we are now. I mean, it was bad then, and it was a very clear, although she didn't spell this out, it felt very clear that it had some relevance to the three major religions in the world, which we're dealing with right now, right? The Christianity, or one of the three major,
like the Abrahamic religions, or
right. And there was something with that. And at that point, I hadn't realized how powerful, for example, Mary was or how honored she was in Islam. Then I heard this statement. She appears in the Quran more times than she
I've
does in the
heard
Bible.
that.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I happened to go to an art museum in San Francisco, the Asian Art Museum, and I wound up kind of tagging along a tour, and it was about the Silk Road, and how they would, oils and do the trade. And the guide was telling a story how when they came in and took over some of the churches, they did not defame the statues of Mary. They would destroy everything else, but they would leave her intact. Like they wouldn't chop her head off or the statue or anything. And I was very impressed by that. I was like, wow, there's something here. So I felt like there was something about the divine feminine or the mother. Like, I guess this was showing me that there's real substance to my message. I guess at that time, I'm still thinking it was going to be coming through the prism of Mother Mary.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I got a little bit more of a perspective on that. That's when she asked me to walk the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral.
Okay.
Once or maybe twice, which I did. And the first time I got into the center of the labyrinth, she said, "Welcome back." And she handed me a yellow rose, which I didn't realize at the time the color yellow, but a yellow rose is symbolic of a friendship, some kind of camaraderie type of thing. And whereas like red would be romantic love and, that kind of thing. And then I started to, get more messages. I would sit in that particular pew. It would become a portal. I would receive guidance. And I was taken to many different teachings. And, some of them were a little bit triggering. And I'd say the highest one probably was the womb chakra teachings.
Yeah.
Like you were saying earlier, I still had some of that wounding. So I would get triggered by this is coming through a mail, or this is whatever's being said, or that kind of thing. Right. And I really just, that's probably why she kind of gave me a heads up. And I would keep reminding myself that she had asked that of me. Don't resist them, So that's how began developing a relationship with her. And I received like initiations from many different goddesses, like I'll say through the prism of different goddesses.
Okay.
Different things. And I don't know if you read the Sophia Code, but she talks about the different goddesses. And I had some of the same goddesses that she had experienced.
Wow. Are you serious? She does. I've stayed away from a lot of books like that. I've only read ancient text and I read Dan's book. But I wanted to stay away from what other people were receiving. But I kept finding that other people were receiving the same as me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've done the same thing by and large. Like, even though I did have that book and I scanned it, I didn't really read it cover to cover. No dishonor. It's just that I didn't want my experience to be colored.
That's how I felt. That's how I felt as well. But I'm freaking out because, mine was all I had several, just like you said, goddesses come through. And my first one was in a green dress.
Wow.
And it's the first chapter of my book. It's in the first episode, of my Sophia series. And then suddenly, like, the most crazy synchronicity ended with Bridget Flinclair, who was a Bridget, who told me in her episode about her book that she was also leading groups. One was the Keys of Enoch, and the other one, and she has a beautiful accent from England, and the other one was Priestess Sophia. Wow. And when I went back because I was really interested in the Keys of Enoch because I was studying the Book of Enoch and all of that stuff at the time. So I said, well, I'll order the Keys of Enoch, but I want to get that other book she was talking about too. So I was looking for Priestess of Fear. I'm like, I can't find this damn book.
Wow.
So, and that is how, and when I went to order the Keys of Enoch, which I did, underneath it, there was another beautiful white book with gold letters on the front that said Priestess Sophia. And I said, oh my gosh, that's the Priestess of Fear. And so I ordered it just blindly. And both books led me to where I am today. And with so much synchronicity, I also received around that time this dream. My dreams are very amazing, but what looks like a labyrinth.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And so,
Wow.
and then the dove has been a very significant part of my journey, which also has had a dark turn. I don't know if Dan shared with you about that,
I
but
think, yes, I do remember.
yeah, yeah,
I don't, I'm pretty, the gist of it.
yeah. There's no doubt that the divine feminine's rising and connecting with those who I think had the foundation to be open to receive this if they followed, you know, their call,
Yeah.
which I see is really happening in a lot of people. I have goosebumps all over my face right now and everything. I felt very alone in this for a while. I think I even shared that with Dan because I was so happy to speak with someone who knew the divinity of Sophia and a scholar when it comes to Sophia. He was validating so many things for me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that where I really appreciate the fact that in a way that I haven't been exposed, over the years to all these things real intensely, because
Yeah.
I can share. Since we've been together, and we were friends for probably maybe 7 years before getting into a relationship within the same community in terms of spiritual community, and we had done talks together on Sophia and things, but I was always coming from personal experience, but I didn't know, like, so I would be able to share with him experiences, and he would say, oh, like,
Yeah.
that's in Thunder Perfect Mind, or that's and I
Right.
just, it was great because in a sense I didn't have that like preconceived
Yeah.
idea, because I
Yeah.
actually did have a thunder experience. Out,
Wow.
I was staying at an ashram, Sri Aurobindo and the mother had this, kind of real private ashram that I would go to and stay for a few days in exchange for, work a few hours a day or something. And one night in bed, and I hear this like loudest thunder that you'd ever imagine to hear. And I hear, "She is here." And so intense. And I don't like, there wasn't much after that, just that the power is just like the sound of her and the power and her being introduced. And later, when I was sharing this experience, he's like, "You had a thunder experience? Well, that is definitely Sophia. Like, that is a whole thing." And it was funny in the ashram the next day, I was like, "Oh my God, what that storm was crazy." And nobody's like, "What storm?" I feel like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. And I also love that, your purpose is, to really raise the consciousness of
Yes.
humanity to receive this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you really do have to. There's no way I could have raised. If you would have told me this 10 years ago, I
Right.
would have been like praying for you at church.
No, and I hear you, and it is true. It's, you can, and my goal with people is to never push anybody further away. So I
Yeah.
really kind of, I'm not too heavy-handed on that for people that are not used to this, because talking about God as feminine for a lot of people is super triggering. I mean,
It
most
is.
people still. I mean, it's very triggering, and so it's a very gentle, introduction, but the people that are like ready for it and can hear it, it just like something moves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that, I mean, I don't know about with your family, but my mom, she knows all about Sophia because, she's coming over all the time and I'll tell her, this and that. I mean, she fully believes in Sophia. I mean, she's still Catholic. She still goes to church.
Mhm.
But in the way that it's almost like she's had like the drip of Sophia, not like a teaching of it,
Right.
and not, she's seen me evolve through it. So I know what I had to go through to be able to accept that. And
Right.
so, to see my mom,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of, want to hear about her, want to hear the stories in the Gnostic, want to hear the stories of Mary Magdalene about how she was such a big part of, if she was a disciple, his greatest disciple, and she wanted to learn. She was hungry, like I am. I feel
Yeah.
that way.
Yes. Yes.
I think that they still can connect to it because it is a Christian teaching,
Right.
just
Right.
one that, they haven't heard.
Yes, yes. So I think there's degrees of that, and people can receive what they're ready to receive. And
Yeah.
I can remember, when you asked me my first introduction, but years ago, I was on a call with quite a few Waldorf teachers, and that was the first time I used to hear them talking about Sophia, but I didn't quite get who she was at the time.
Right.
But I was very fascinated and very drawn to it. But I kept saying, I must not be understanding. And I guess they just assumed everybody on the call understood. And so there wasn't a real explanation. But I think she was working in my consciousness for years before I was ready, and certainly through Mother Mary.
So if somebody asked you, who is Sophia? Which is a very complex question.
It is a very complex
That's
question.
like asking who is, God or who is Jesus, really.
Yeah. So I think of Sophia as she's like the feminine aspect of God, and she is equal and she is different. I believe all souls come from her womb. I believe that she is the divine feminine, like the aspect, the high Holy Sophia, I'll say, because the Gnostic, sometimes it gets confusing for people or triggering because they feel like maybe she fell or she did something or, that kind of thing. And she got trapped with the Archon. So when I refer to her as the high Holy Sophia, it's that full whole aspect that is, again, equally as powerful as the father aspect and totally complementary, and is the expression that we're each being asked, those that are ready and want the embodiment, for that embodiment process to happen. It's that energy that we're bringing in, and then we'll each have our different expressions of that. That's why I loved your message with no one Sophia, and I feel that she's coming in, and however she is, I think there'll be some unifying energy that people can feel of what that is, but then there'll be different expressions, like a little bit different flavors, or how that's going to look, or different ways, people resonate with different things. And, I believe that the divine is using everything at this point. Whatever you have that works for you, if you have a good sense of humor, that's going to be used. If you have whatever it is, a gentleness that people need to feel. Like I said, I work in the recovery centers, and I think what I'm bringing there as far as that aspect of Sophia is the non-judgment, or like I'm not seeing these damaged people. And I think most people are seeing them as damage. I mean, I always say, look, you may be sitting there, I may be sitting here, but we're all just walking each other home. Which is a famous quote of Ram Dass, right? And I love it. They can respond to that because I think that they don't feel judged, And that's the aspect of the mother that I can bring in, as well as I literally go around and do hands-on healing for even if there's 20 people in the class, everybody might get 3 minutes. But there's something about the touch that is very powerful in a sacred way. Most people are not touched in sacred ways. I mean, those of us that are more spiritual may go to or do anointings or some kind of blessings, but a lot of people right now in the world are not experiencing that anywhere.
I know. And when you talk about doing like the bridal chamber, I think Dan did explain that a little bit on my podcast. I think he did. But when I first hear that, I was thinking like chastity belt. I was thinking secret society.
Yeah.
What is bridal chamber? And is that like what you're talking about? Some sort of blessing that you do?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think at first I didn't really see the full picture. I'm like, well, this is a bridal chamber and I've been asked to do a ritual in it, and this is the ritual I've been given. But is this, how does this line up? And I think it's taken me some time to figure that out. So predominantly the relationship between the masculine and the feminine within each of us, right? That has to come together first.
Yeah.
And I think along with that is the ability to receive your crown, right? It's like Mother Mary, when we see the pictures of her, like she's famous images that when Dan and I were in Europe, we went around and looked at the coronation. One in England that is like very primary, that the Knights Templar a church there that it appears it's a very, I'll say, rudimentary image of the carnation. And then there's other ones in France, like Leon, Rhymes. They have one, and there's just certain ones that speak to me more than others. I had a powerful experience with one of those too, where the image came down and kind of like, it felt like it stamped itself on me. And it was a beautiful image of Mary, very relational, like looking at Jesus, but like very, in a way that just didn't only look exalted, it looked very grounded and personal. So again, Mary and Jesus, I think, are used to represent like the Christ Sophia, right? That I feel is what's happening in the bridal chamber. The Christ Sophia energies are coming together, and that togetherness is the crown. And I'm reading a book now called Walking the Path of Christ Sophia, exploring the hidden tradition, Christian spirituality. It was written years ago by a couple, and has some very interesting things in there about that I recommend. Just this whole idea that you really can't come to the idea of Sophia, or certainly Christ Sophia, unless you kind of take the routes that are not, let's say, Christian. The big paths are like Christianity, right? You have to be on the byways and decide
the path less chosen.
Path next, yes, to receive that. And it's like, but it's necessary. I think once you experience Sophia, I sense in people, yourself included, is like almost like this responsibility
to
share her, right? And I think that we have to have that, or we can't get to compassion. There's something about her energy, and then again, like the Christ Sophia, or Sophia. I know this says Christos Sophia, but I feel that she's asking also to sometimes switch it back and put her name first. Sophia.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Sophia Christo.
First thought. She's the first.
Yes, right. It's just a whole other thing. Yeah. And then, Dan and I in our relationship are definitely exploring that, right? But we each have to have that balance already in ourselves. And then we bring that, and we can exemplify what that looks like in relationship.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. You guys definitely do. And what I find is crazy is that what you said, you didn't want to push people away by like bombarding them with that either. And I feel like that's what it's not even something I've tried to do, but first of all, it's not just for women, right? And it's kind of like how I explained with my mother. It was almost like a drip. Yes. And that drip turned into, a puddle that turned into a lake that turns into an ocean. And I feel like I've been led to do that with my podcast. It comes in waves as it's divinely led. And I hope that, everyone who's ever listened to my podcast knows the name Sophia. But, truly, I agree with you that if you just throw it all on, that's actually not the way of the divine feminine, right? It is more subtle, and it goes through cycles like the moon, right? It is flowing.
Absolutely. And you bring up I'm so glad that you said that, what you said, because this is another place, let's say, where we're swimming in the waters of the way the masculine has done things, right? And it's much more full on, yes. and that the softer, gentler approach. And I even take that to even the womb chakra teachings. Honestly, I totally honor and am so blessed to have gotten those teachings and to be able to teach this work. But it's very strict. Like, it's, how like meditation, you can't move a muscle type of thing. It's very strict on, you have to do these mantras, you do them for 101 nights. You can't miss a night. If you miss a night, you go back to the first day. And what I started to see happening is I would have young mothers say to me, I'm pregnant and I really would love to do these mantras. I know they're very powerful, could be very powerful for the baby, but I'm afraid to start because I have 2 other little boys and I know they're going to interrupt me and I'm never going to get it done. I'm never going to get my mala charged, with this mantra for 101 nights in a row. It's just never going to happen. And that made me so sad, And so one of the things that I feel like I'm doing is I'm taking those teachings and I'm trying to put them in a way that has a more feminine approach.
Yeah, because a mother would know that you
Yes,
cannot do that.
you cannot do that. And,
Yes.
and I kind of, in that, I go back to the rosary, right? The grandmothers would be stirring a pot of soup, have a baby on their hip, and have a rosary in their apron pocket. And that's okay. That's okay. And holding that other piece, the feminine piece, I received so much from my Eastern teachings and my meditation. I'm, forever grateful. And it's not always practical. And we have to bring back a feminine way of praying, a feminine way of connecting.
In an evolved way.
Yeah. And not always necessarily transcending and leaving this realm, which, I understand the impetus for that,
Right.
but no, bringing it into the body, what does it feel like? How do I be this in this world? And
I love that.
It's a very different way. Right?
It is. I feel that way about Reiki and the way I teach it too.
Oh,
and
wow.
This is the history and this is, I'll teach you, the traditions, but in the end, make it your own.
Yes. And I think that's really something that has to happen now, because it can be accessible once again to women who are not living in monasteries and don't, are really doing the
not
work.
Just passed down in secrecy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This conversation means so much to me. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. I'm honored to have had the privilege to be here and have this conversation, and it's been wonderful.
I agree.
So natural and such a nice flow. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I feel Sophia, all over this conversation.